Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So today we are covering another case from the world of TikTok. Because back in 2020, a video was posted on TikTok of a woman dancing. Everything just seemed normal. However, what people didn't realize was this video, this seemingly normal video of this woman just dancing, had a very chilling and horrifying backstory. Because the woman dancing in this video was a woman named Nicola Priest. And to sum Nicola up, she was obsessed with two things. That was social media and herself. She would constantly post on social media, Facebook, Instagram, especially TikTok, of herself dancing. But there was another significant thing in Nicola's life, and that is that she was a mom. She was the mother of a young girl called Kaye. And Kaye was just the sweetest little girl. And you can see her all over her mom's social media, dancing with her in her TikTok videos. However, Nicola thought that there was one problem with Kaye, and that is that she was getting in the way of her sex life. And then one day she meets an evil man called Callum, and he was only with Nicola for sex. Nothing more, nothing less. That was the only thing that he was interested in. And from the moment they met, Kaye was treated appallingly. She suffered extreme neglect, and then before you know it, the absolute worst happened. And what is one of the most shocking things of all about this case is that after the worst happened, Nicola took to TikTok to carry on posting her dancing videos. And that is what we are going to be covering today, an incredibly infuriating case. So let's jump in. And I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is Magellan TV. And I have been working with Magellan TV for years now. They are my favorite documentary streaming service. And if you are a fan of true crime, which if you're here, I assume you are, you definitely need to check Magellan TV out. But not just that, I mentioned this at the end of last year, but I have also collaborated with Magellan TV to create my very own true crime playlist, and it features some of my favorite true crime documentaries. There is one on Jonestown, Charles Manson, Fred and Rose West, of course. There are so many documentaries in my true crime binge list, so if you want one place to go to, you just need to go to my playlist on the Magellan TV app. And it's not just true crime documentaries, they are a documentary streaming service, so they have documentaries from every single genre. They are constantly releasing new true crime content on the platform. I've recently just watched a documentary on there called The Most Shocking Celebrity Deaths of All Time, which was amazing. Highly recommend that one. They've also just released a deep dive 3-part series on the Beverly Allitt tapes, which is one of the most shocking true crime cases from the UK, a case that I may actually cover at some point in the future on this channel. Magellan TV have also just released a 10-part series called The Killer Within, which features an episode on the Twilight Killers. Do you remember the Twilight Killers? That was the second true crime video that I created for this channel, which was like 4.5 years ago now. Wow, that seems like so long ago, but also it seems like yesterday. I highly recommend checking out my personal playlist on Magellan TV, and I will leave a link in my description box down below. Non-subscribers can also check out my playlist and watch a preview of all of the documentaries for free. But if you did want to become a Magellan TV subscriber like myself, then I have an amazing offer just for my audience that allows you to sign up for Magellan TV for just 99 cents for the first month. So I 100% recommend checking out Magellan TV for that price. There are so many documentaries on there. And you can access that amazing exclusive offer by going to the link in my description box. And then you can check out my custom playlist right away and start binging some documentaries. So thank you again to Magellan TV for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you watching right now, because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Nicola Priest was born in 1998. An exact date of birth is not known, and she grew up in Birmingham in the UK, where she lived with her mom, sister, and her stepdad. Now, when it comes to Nicola's younger childhood, we don't actually know pretty much anything about that. The only thing we know is that it was a pretty normal childhood. However, then when Nicola gets into her teenage years, she began to go off the rails. She started using cannabis at just the age of 15, and she also started to have a very volatile relationship with her family. It was also around this time where she meets a fellow teenager by the name of Callum Redfern, who is very significant to today's case. They develop a close relationship. I think it's just a friendship when they're teenagers. But remember Callum, because he does leave the case right now, but he does come back up because he's evil. It was also around this time when Nicola started to become fixated and obsessed with her appearance. She dreamt of becoming a model. She constantly posted photos of herself all over social media. She liked to receive compliments from people. She liked to see the likes coming in on social media. She got a buzz out of that. And then when Nicola was 17 years old, something very significant happens. And that is that she falls pregnant. Now, this was out of the blue. It was a surprise pregnancy. We actually don't know who the biological dad is. It's not Callum, who we've just brought up. No, it's not Callum. We can only assume that it's just a fellow 17-year-old boy that maybe she went to school with or just was friends with. But yeah, we don't know anything about the dad. And as far as I'm aware, the dad is not in the picture either. So when Nicola falls pregnant, she actually doesn't know whether to terminate the pregnancy or not. She felt like she was too young. She wasn't ready for this. But in the end, she did decide to keep the baby. And on the 31st of January 2017, she gave birth to a baby girl named Kaye Jade Priest. Now, at first, everything was bliss. Everything was perfect. It was like a little honeymoon period because Nicola, she still lived at home. She still lived with her mom and her sister. And between the three of them, they raised baby Kaye. Nicola received a ton of support. Her mom and her sister were great with baby Kaye. Nicola was posting her new baby all over social media, saying how proud she was of her baby girl and that she was also, quote, over the moon, that she loved the name Kaye. She also shared a lot about her pregnancy journey, saying how easy it was. And if you looked on her social media, you would think that she was the happiest person on the planet to be a mom to Kaye. She wanted the whole world to know how amazing she was, that she was this amazing, strong young mom. However, in reality, that was not the case. Because behind closed doors, Nicola didn't care about her daughter one single bit. Like literally, she did nothing to help raise Kaye. She refused to change nappies. She never got up during the night to feed Kaye. She never bathed Kaye. She never showed her any affection. She never read to her. Nothing. Kaye was raised by the mom and the sister. So Kaye's grandmother and aunt. Every single thing about Kaye, about how she was raised, was left to the mom and the sister. So what was Nicola doing instead? What was so important that made her ignore her daughter? Well, nothing. She was actually just doing nothing apart from being on social media. She was more interested in her romantic life. She would just be sliding into the DMs of other boys, flirting, trying to find her next hookup. Like that is the only thing that she cared about. Posting selfies and hooking up with people. And whenever Nicola did spend some time with her daughter, that didn't go down too well either. Because there was one time, it was the middle of winter. So it was freezing cold. Nicola decided to take her daughter Kaye to the park, which is like, great, finally you're stepping up, trying to be a parent. However, she took Kaye to the park with no coat on. And I'm like, what the hell? What the hell is going through your brain? Why would you take a child to the park in the middle of winter with no coat on? And the only reason that Nicola took Kaye to the park in the first place is because she was meeting up with another boy. Like seriously, she was just using Kaye as an accessory. Like, oh look, I have a daughter. I'm an amazing mom. And she stayed out in this park in the middle of winter until 11 p.m. So then finally Kaye was brought home to be in the warmth and Nicola's mom was horrified. She was horrified that Nicola took her daughter to the park with no coat on, that she just didn't care at all about Kaye's well-being. So it was actually better for baby Kaye to be raised by the mom and the sister. So now we jump forward a little bit. It is now the middle of 2018. Kaye is around 18 months old and Nicola gets into her first proper serious relationship. And this was with a man named Daniel Gregory. Now, Daniel, he was around the same age as Nicola. The two of them met on social media. They started flirting on social media and then it turned into dating and then they were in this full-blown relationship. Now, in the beginning of the relationship, everything was great. Daniel was actually a really good person. He kind of became a stepdad to Kaye and he was there for Kaye more than her own bloody mother. So the three of them, they would go on days out. They were like this little family. I can just imagine that Kaye was probably so happy to maybe even have her mom in her life and just to be spending some time with her mom because Nicola didn't give Kaye the time of day until Daniel arrived. And obviously she still wasn't bothering with Kaye, but she was still kind of there, if that makes sense. And Daniel has said that Kaye was just the sweetest little girl. She was so bubbly. She was so happy. She always had a smile on her face and she was just an incredible kid to be around. However, it didn't take long for Daniel to realize something, and that is that Nicola was obsessed with social media. She constantly had her phone in her hand. She was constantly on social media, constantly scrolling, constantly taking photos of herself, constantly posting, recording videos of herself. She just wanted compliments from people. She wanted validation from others. And you can see all of this on TikTok, which was the main social media platform that she was obsessed with. The account had a few hundred followers, and there are tons of videos on there, mostly just like doing like the challenges and the dances, like the dance trends that were currently going on. There is actually quite a few videos of her dancing with her daughter, you know, pretending to actually care about her daughter. And Daniel realized that Nicola was very fixated on portraying this fake persona online, because she was sharing videos of her daughter Kaye, pretending to care about her. But in reality, that was not the case. Nicola didn't care one little bit about her daughter. She left all of the parenting to her mom, to her sister, and now to her new boyfriend, Daniel. Nicola was also, quote, obsessed with live streaming herself. Again, this was all about attention. It was all about validation. She wanted compliments from people. And this was so much more important to her than spending time with her own daughter. And I'm sure it didn't take long for Daniel to get completely fed up with this. However, things do not get better from here, because now Nicola has a massive falling out with her family. And according to Nicola, the whole falling out was because her mom, Debbie, was criticizing her parenting. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're not parenting at all. I think she has every right to criticize your parenting. But Nicola didn't like criticism. Oh, no, don't criticize her parenting. She's doing the best that she can. But her mom, Debbie, was just like, you're not doing enough for your daughter. You don't care about her. You're not looking after her. And Nicola was outraged by this. She said that her mom was judgmental and controlling. And I'm like, what? Your mom is actually just telling you the truth. However, Nicola decided, you know what, I don't have to put up with this. And Nicola packed up her bags and left. And she went to live with Daniel instead. And I really wish I could tell you that she left baby Kaye behind, because that would have been better for everybody. However, no, that was not the case. She, for some reason, I know she's her biological daughter, but she doesn't care about her. For some reason, she took Kaye with her. And what was just even worse is that she forbid her family, her mom, Debbie, her sister, everyone, from seeing Kaye ever again. And that's just absolutely despicable, because the mom, Debbie, and the sister, everyone, they're the only people that actually care about Kaye. And Nicola has just completely cut them out of baby Kaye's life. She is using Kaye as a pawn in these arguments, and it's just disgusting. So Nicola went to live with Daniel, but it wasn't just Daniel that she was living with. Daniel was also still living at home, so it was also his mom that they were living with. And Daniel's mom, Lisa, welcomed Nicola into the home. She welcomed baby Kaye into the home, which was very generous of her. However, things were not smooth sailing at all, because Nicola is obviously living full time with Daniel and his mom. And this is when the troubling parenting style that Nicola had started to begin, because now Nicola's actually having to look after baby Kaye because her mom is no longer around. So the first thing that Daniel and his mom Lisa noticed is that Nicola never showed any affection towards her daughter. She barely even spoke to her. She never cuddled her. She never gave her compliments. She never played with her. She never kissed her. She never bathed her. Like, she just never spent any time with her daughter. The only time Nicola would actually really interact with her daughter was when she needed to post a video with her on TikTok. She was far more interested in social media and just scrolling on her phone all day than even just saying hello to her daughter. The only attention she ever did show Kaye was negative. She would scream and shout at her. She would swear at her. She would call her names. Nicola actually called her daughter a little bitch. She called her a little rat. There were other times where she called her a, quote, rat bitch. And she also called her daughter a cunt. And why was Nicola lashing out at her daughter? It would be for the smallest things, Like Kaye tapping on her mother's leg to just get her attention. That was literally it. That was all it took for Nicola to lash out at her daughter. And she was calling these names directly to her daughter, and Kaye was incredibly stressed. She was upset. She would be always screaming. She was so scared. She truly didn't know what she had done wrong. She was only trying to get her mom's attention because she was hungry, or her nappy needed changing, or maybe she just wanted a hug. And if Kaye ever, quote, misbehaved, and when I say misbehaved, I truly just mean Kaye was a toddler. She was curious about the world, and she would get into cupboards or like get into a room and maybe mess things up. Like there was one time where she went into the bathroom and the toilet seat was up and she put her hand in the clean toilet water, which is not her fault, you know? She's a toddler, she's curious. The toilet seat is up for starters. Like she's going to put her hands in things. But Nicola absolutely lost it. She started smacking her on her legs, on her arms. Kaye was screaming and crying, but Nicola didn't care one little bit. There were even times when Daniel's mom, Lisa, saw bruises on Kaylee's cheeks. And she was thinking, this is not right at all. Like, why does this child have bruises on her cheeks? So she confronted Nicola about this. And Nicola just said, yeah, I slapped her. She deserved it. She was being a little shit. And Daniel's mom, Lisa, was absolutely appalled. It's like, how can you say that about your child? She's like 18 months old. Daniel's mom, Lisa, tried to tell Nicola that this was not acceptable. Like, you couldn't do this. But Nicola didn't listen. She never listened to anybody. And things go on like this for about a year or so. Nicola is treating baby Kaye appallingly and pretty much just getting away with it. Until eventually, in July of 2019, Nicola and Daniel decide that it's time for them to move out and get a place of their own. So they move into a 2-bedroom flat in Kingshurst in Birmingham. This is when Kaye is now 2 years old and she starts attending nursery for the very first time. And Kaye absolutely loved it at nursery, which I'm not surprised because it is a respite for her from her terrible mom. But Kaye, she loved going to nursery. She made lots of friends. She loved playing with the toys. She loved playing with dolls. And what just really breaks my heart is the way she would play with her dolls is she would pretend to care for them. Like she would be very motherly towards the dolls, and I can't help but just think that is what she wishes her mom was like with her. Kaye was also incredibly polite to the staff. She was very friendly. Everyone just loved Kaye. She was so bubbly. She always had a smile on her face. The staff also described Kaye as very active, very self-driven, and they described her as a busy little bee. At this point in Kaye's life, Kaye seemed to be thriving. No one had any concerns about her. When Kaye was at home, Daniel really stepped up and he was basically her sole carer. Nicola did nothing. Daniel basically raised Kaye. He would be the one to feed her. He would be the one to bathe her. He dressed her in the morning. He would take her on trips out. He would talk to her. He would read to her. He would comfort her. But then something else happens. Nicola falls pregnant. And I'm like, oh my God, really? No. People, wrap it up. Like seriously, she doesn't even want her first child. Use some sort of protection. Now, Daniel, he was over the moon about becoming a dad because he was a good person. He was being a really good dad to Kaye. Kaye was also thrilled about becoming a big sister. And for this short period of time, everyone seemed to be very, very happy. However, would things stay like that? No, sadly not. Because now we get to March of 2020. This is when the pandemic, COVID, really hit the UK. And this is also the same time that Nicola went into labour. So not the best timing, really. However, everything was fine with the birth. However, after going home and after spending a few weeks with their new baby, this is when something very important happens. Because it wasn't long until Daniel and Nicola had a huge argument. Nicola accuses Daniel of speaking to other girls behind her back. Daniel then told Nicola that she was a bad parent and that he didn't like her attitude towards life in general, and it just went from there and it turned into a huge argument. And it was so big that only weeks after having their new baby, which was a baby boy by the way, they break up. Daniel moves out, he moves back in with his mom, leaving Nicola alone in this 2-bedroom flat with now 2 children. The couple worked out a custody agreement where Nicola would have their baby son during the week and Daniel would have their son on the weekends. And why is all of this very important? Well, that is because things go downhill very quickly from this moment. Because pretty much straight away after the breakup, Nicola starts to feel incredibly lonely. So she turns to social media to find a new hookup, to find anyone really. And it didn't take her long to get back in touch with one of her old friends, Callum Redfern. So yes, remember Callum? I brought him up at the very beginning of this video. They became friends when they were only teenagers. They clearly lost contact, but now they have reconnected. Nicola asks Callum if he wants to hang out. Callum agrees straight away and he turns up at Nicola's flat. And the very first evening that they reconnect, they have sex because that is all their relationship is about. It is just about sex. At least it is for Callum, because over the next few weeks, they are spending a lot of time together and they just have sex. That is it. That is all their relationship is. But within no time, Nicola started to fall head over heels for Callum. However, there was one problem. Callum didn't feel the same because to him, this relationship was just sex. That is the only thing that he wanted from Nicola. In his mind, they were friends with benefits. Nothing more, nothing less. But did he let Nicola know this? No, he didn't. He definitely strung her along. He made her believe that they were essentially boyfriend and girlfriend. Not that I feel sorry for Nicola at all, but yeah, Callum is very evil as well. Nicola would text Callum saying, "Oh my God, you're so sexy." And he would reply, "So are you, baby." Nicola would then text him, "I love you, baby. Never forget that. You mean so much to me." And Callum would just be like, "Yeah, okay." And why was Callum doing this? Why was he leading Nicola on? Well, he was getting a lot of benefits from this relationship. First of all, he had sex on tap. Whenever he wanted, he had sex. But he was also using Nicola as a human ATM. Nicola would give Callum money whenever he wanted because she felt so in love with him. There was even one time when Nicola gave Callum £900 so he could go out and buy a BMW. And I just want to point out that Nicola's financial situation at this point is not great. She is unemployed. She just lives off benefits and she's trying to raise 2 children. And since Daniel has left as well, Nicola is obviously left to pay all of the bills on the flat and she was getting into so much debt. It was piling up and up. She was getting letters through the door regularly threatening legal action. So yeah, her financial situation is about as bad as it can get. But she's still giving all of her money to Callum. And Callum took the £900 to buy himself a BMW, but the car that he bought, which was a BMW, it only cost him £600. But instead of giving the £300 back to Nicola, he just pocketed that for himself. And he did things like that all the time. He would always just say, like, "Oh, I need some money for this." And Nicola would be like, "Here you go." And it's just crazy to me that Nicola has never cared about anyone ever. She's never shown any affection or attention to anyone. But then Callum comes along and she's just so different. She's so obsessed with him. However, if you think all of that is bad, oh, it gets so much worse because Callum, he is basically a walking red flag. It couldn't be more obvious. He might as well have a red flag on his bloody head because Callum had serious anger problems. He had very bad aggression. It took literally nothing to send him into a rage. He was always getting into fights with people in public. He was always getting into trouble with the police. He would always get into fights with his own friends as well, where he would, quote, threaten to smash their faces in. So yeah, he's just a great person all around. That's definitely the kind of person you want around your children. There was one time where he got arrested because he went to his ex-girlfriend's house to get revenge and he climbed on her car and just started smashing the windows and smashing the car up. There was even another incident in his BMW car that he bought with Nicola's money where he placed the 2 children, so Kaye and the new baby boy, in the back of the car and he just starts speeding and racing all over Birmingham, driving incredibly dangerously with 2 children in the back of the car. And this actually resulted in a car chase with the police. And I don't know where Nicola was. I don't know if she was in the car or not. I just don't know. But it's like, yeah, not the kind of person you want to be around, and especially not the kind of person that should be around children. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what Callum is like as a person. And the relationship between Callum and Nicola goes on like this for a few more months, where it's basically just very sexual and Nicola is just giving him money all of the time. However, there is something very significant that happened during this period, and that is that the treatment of Kaye got so much worse. Now, we already know that Nicola is an incredibly neglectful parent, so it's like, how much worse can it get? But since Kaye was born, she had always had other people to fall back on. When Kaye was first born, she fell back on her mom, and then she fell back on Daniel. Daniel basically raised Kaye. However, those 2 people are not around anymore to raise Kaye. So the neglect of poor little Kaye was on another level now. So at this point, Kaye is only 3 years old. She's still so incredibly young. She needs a lot of care, a lot of affection and attention. But Nicola did absolutely nothing for her. Kaye was not fed properly. She always was hungry. This led to malnutrition. Kaye started losing a lot of weight. Kaye also had very poor hygiene. She was never bathed properly. She had to dress in dirty clothing because her clothes were never washed. She also was left in dirty nappies for hours. But not just that, Nicola never gave Kaye any stimulation at all. She never had any toys to play with. There was no books. There was just no stimulation, nothing. Kaye was just left there as a 3-year-old to basically just stare at a wall. And to make things just even worse is that Kaye's bedroom, and I use that word very loosely, was also completely bare. There was no bedroom furniture. There was just a dirty mattress on the floor. No sheets, no covers or anything, just a mattress that was incredibly dirty on the floor. There was also no carpet down, so there was just exposed floorboards. There was no curtains or blinds up, and there was also no light bulb in the room either. So when it got to nighttime, Kaye was just left to sit on this mattress and stare at a wall in the dark. The room was also incredibly filthy. It was filled with debris, dust, mold. Nicola never cleaned that room. And it's just an awful environment, and it's horrible to think of any child just being left in a room like that. But it gets even worse, because now that Nicola is so fixated on Callum, she neglects Kaye even more, and instead she spends all of her time trying to please Callum instead, which meant that, for example, Nicola would throw parties late into the night for Callum and his friends to please Callum and impress him. But this meant that Kaye was just locked in her bedroom to keep her out of the way. Nicola and Callum would do drugs together in front of Kaye. They would shout and argue all of the time in front of Kaye as well. This was the worst kind of environment for a child you can imagine. But not just that, Nicola and Callum would lock Kaye in her bedroom quite frequently so they could have sex. And this was at the request of Callum. He just wanted her out of the way. He would usually just pick up Kaye himself and lock her in her bedroom, which is just a mattress on the floor, remember? And he would just abandon her so himself and Nicola could have sex. And this probably doesn't come as a surprise to any of you, but Callum also despised Kaye. And I don't know why, because he doesn't seem to despise the baby boy as much. He just seems to despise Kaye. And I don't know if it's because she's older and she gets in the way more, and she was maybe more annoying to him because she could talk and it's just easier to ignore a baby. I just don't know. But because Callum despised Kaye so much, he wanted her out of his way and kept locked away as much as possible. And what would happen if Kaye didn't stay out of the way? Well, Callum would encourage Nicola to physically punish her daughter. And this is now where this case becomes even harder to listen to. Because if Callum ever had a problem with Kaye, Nicola would punish her by slapping and kicking her. She would call her an effing brat. She would turn up the already loud music to drown out Kaye's cries. Nicola would also beat Kaye over the head. She would drag her around that flat by her arm. She would literally throw her into her bedroom and lock the door. There were always bruises all over Kaye. Callum and Nicola obviously knew about these bruises, which meant that they kept Kaye out of the public eye because they didn't want to get into trouble for physically abusing a young girl. Neighbours would also hear a lot of banging, screaming and shouting coming from the flat, and neighbours could actually hear Kaye screaming out in pain. However, whenever the neighbours confronted Nicola about the screaming child that they could hear, Nicola would just say that her daughter had fallen out of bed, which was obviously a lie because Kaye didn't even have a bed. And it was really easy for them to keep the abuse hidden as well, because you got to remember that it's the COVID pandemic right now and everyone is in lockdown. However, they weren't able to completely hide the abuse because they did hire a young babysitter one time so that Nicola and Callum could go out. And when the couple returned, Nicola started striking Kaye over the head multiple times in front of the babysitter. And why was Nicola striking Kaye over the head on this particular time? Well, it was simply because Kaye told her mom that she was hungry. So the young babysitter witnessed all this, and when I say young, I mean like a teenager, like a school-age teenager. So they are incredibly young and they didn't know what to do. They were horrified, of course, but they were also kind of scared. So the abuse again went unreported. It was still hidden and the abuse of Kaye continued. And by the time we get to the end of July 2020, which is around 4 months after Callum has come into the picture, this is when things start to get even more concerning. Because Nicola and Callum sent a series of text messages to one another that had some incredibly dark undertones. Nicola said, quote, "I am going to kill her. She keeps leaving the living room. I have smacked her for shitting her nappy." Callum then replies, "Give her a smack from me as well." To which Nicola says, "I will, babes." In another conversation, Nicola says, "It's going off in my life. I'm angry." Callum says, "Why? What's up?" To which Nicola replies, "'Cause Kaye, I told her she's a brat for hitting me. I've cut my hand because of Kaye now, babe. I want to kill some bitch." To which Callum says, "Keep that little brat away from me." And then in another conversation where they were discussing plans for Callum's birthday, Nicola says, "We can just bring Kaye with us. She can play with the other children." To which Callum angrily says, "Not with her face and legs bruised like that. I'm just staying in my bed on my own. I can't be arsed anymore. I'm sick of that brat daughter of yours. I could happily go and kill myself to make my life stress-free." And seeing those text messages are so concerning. For Callum to say that he is going to take his own life rather than put up with the brat of a daughter, Kaye. It's like she's 3 years old. She's done nothing wrong. And Nicola, we know, is so obsessed with Callum. She wants to do everything to please him. Hearing those words from Callum, as well as a lot of other things from Callum, she's probably worried that her daughter Kaye is getting in the way of her relationship because Callum is expressing so much hate towards this 3-year-old girl for no reason. And sadly, just days after this conversation, this is now where we get to the tragic events of today's case. Because on the 8th of August 2020, this was a Saturday, so Nicola's 5-month-old baby son had been dropped off at his dad Daniel's home for the weekend, meaning that it was just Nicola and Kaye on their own. And I should probably point out now, if I haven't made this obvious, but Callum doesn't live in the flat. So it's just Nicola and Kaye that live in this flat 24/7. Callum is there a lot, but he doesn't live there. And I just want to remind you of their ages. So Kaye is currently 3 years old and Nicola is only 22. She's so incredibly young. And on this day, Nicola and Kaye are seen on CCTV leaving their flat. And you can first see them getting into the lift going down, and poor little Kaye is stood in the corner. You can just see that she's looking at her mom for attention, but Nicola, the only thing that she is interested in is her own appearance in the mirror. You can see her constantly checking her appearance. She's constantly checking her phone as well. Not once does she look at her daughter. Not once does she talk to her daughter, interact with her daughter in any way. Next, you can then see them walking out of the apartment block. Again, Nicola is still not showing her daughter any attention. They head towards a local park and they walk around for a little bit. A while later, You can see them return. They are waiting for the lift to go back up. And again, Nicola is just completely ignoring her daughter. She is more interested in checking out her reflection in the lift or looking at her phone. And it's just so heartbreaking, that whole interaction. And you can just imagine that that is what every day was like for Kaye. Constantly looking up at her mom, trying to get her mom's attention, just trying to get anything from her mom, and her mom doesn't pay her any attention. I just don't understand people. I really don't. How can you ignore a child like that? How can you ignore your own daughter like that? And she's just so well behaved as well. You can see that she's just stood there in the corner. She's probably scared of her mom to even step a toe out of line. And it was just hours after this CCTV footage was captured that the absolute worst happened. Because at around 5 p.m, Nicola was at home with Kaye on their own when Callum sent Nicola a text message saying that he was on his way over. Callum arrived at the flat. He had brought one of his friends along with him. Callum was also carrying a large bottle of vodka. He was planning on getting very drunk that evening and partying. And when they arrived, Kaye was actually sat at the dining table eating her dinner. She was eating some chicken nuggets. She had clearly been allowed to have dinner that evening, which wasn't always guaranteed. And then at around 7 p.m, the friend went out onto the balcony on his own. Callum and Nicola took Kaye into her bedroom and just left her there on that dirty mattress. And then afterwards, when the friend is still there, Callum and Nicola just cannot help themselves. They start to have sex. And whilst the two of them are having sex, Kaye actually starts crying from her bedroom. Now, Callum and Nicola were so angry that Kaye was crying because she was interrupting them having sex. So Callum storms into Kaye's bedroom, Nicola follows, and we don't know the exact details of what happens next. But given the injuries that Kaye sustains, we can only assume that one of them, if not both, Callum and Nicola, were severely beating Kaye up. They were severely beating Kaye for interrupting them having sex. And we will soon find out that their actions when they walked into Kaye's bedroom would have devastating consequences. Because after leaving Kaye's bedroom, Nicola and Callum just start having sex again. They just pick up where they left off. They then return to spend some time with Callum's friend, and God knows what he was thinking. And then around 10 minutes after that, Callum and Nicola go into Kaye's room, and this poor little girl was being violently sick everywhere. And I mean violently, projectile vomit everywhere. Now, neither Callum nor Nicola cared. Neither one of them had any sympathy. Callum definitely didn't want to help Nicola clean up. And not long after this, Callum and his friend leave the flat, leaving Nicola and Kaye alone. And after Callum leaves, Nicola just ignores her daughter and goes back to spending so much time on her phone, on social media, even though her daughter is actually still being violently sick in her bedroom. At around 9:30 p.m, Nicola starts making Google searches of a sexual nature. Whatever that means, that is all we know. And then afterwards, she takes a series of selfies and she posts these online. And then at around 10:30 p.m, she messages Callum saying, "It was so nice seeing you today and good sex. I love it and I love you." She then also sends a message to Callum saying, "Oh, and Kaye's also still being sick as well." 19 minutes after this, Nicola shares an image on Snapchat of her neck with a love bite on it. She also downloaded an image off the internet with the quote, "I want to hit someone with a crowbar." And I'm like, why is she always so angry? And then not long after that, she starts making a number of very concerning Google searches relating to infant deaths, miscarriages, and just very concerning things relating to babies. And given that her daughter is being violently sick in another room after being severely beaten, these Google searches are very concerning. And following this, Nicola then goes to sleep in her bedroom and she just leaves Kaye to just deal with herself. And when Nicola wakes up the next morning, everything goes into a frenzy. And things move very quickly from here. Because at 11 a.m. on the 9th of August, Nicola places a 999 call. And she is absolutely frantic. Firstly, she starts screaming down the phone. She is saying, "Save my daughter, she's not breathing, I think she's dead." The operator tells Nicola to stay calm, to start performing CPR. Nicola tells the operator that she is doing this, but she tells the operator that it's not working. She said that her daughter was turning blue, and she tells the operator that she thinks her daughter fell and hit her head. After 10 minutes, paramedics do arrive at the scene. They rush inside Nicola's flat. They go straight to Kaye. They find Kaye is not moving. She is not breathing. They try to perform CPR. More paramedics come rushing in. They are trying to do everything in their power to save Kaye, but tragically it was all too late. There was nothing the paramedics could do. And this is the moment where 3-year-old Kaye Jade Priest was pronounced dead, which is just so harrowing to think about, the conditions that she was living in to start with, but the fact that she died, she was being violently sick after being severely beaten at the hands of her mom and her boyfriend. It's just so heartbreaking. And soon after Kaye was pronounced dead, the police arrive. They begin their investigation, and this is when they immediately start to pick up on so many red flags. Because the first red flag was when the paramedics arrived, they noticed that Nicola was stood nowhere near her daughter. She was not acting like a concerned mom. She was not kneeling by her daughter, holding her daughter's hand, crying over her, trying to resuscitate her. No, none of that. Nicola had also not attempted any CPR, even though she had told the 999 operator that she was doing it. Nicola then started to come up with a fake story saying that Kaye had fallen from a child's play table a few weeks earlier and that she had been under the weather recently. But one of the biggest red flags is that when police went into Kaye's bedroom, there's pretty much nothing in it. It was just a mattress, a dirty, sheetless mattress on the floor. And Nicola's bedroom didn't look like that. It's not like they just moved in or anything and they were just dealing with the bare minimum right now. This was obviously no environment that any child should be in. So this was obviously very alarming to the police. And it was so suspicious that they immediately took Nicola in for questioning. And of course, in the interview, Nicola came out with a load of BS. She was trying to get out of what she had done. She kept saying that everything that happened with Kaye, it must have been an accident, like her death was an accident. She must have hurt herself somehow and Nicola hadn't noticed, but the police were buying none of it. But from interviewing Nicola, this is when they learn about her relationship with Callum. So they bring Callum in for an interview as well. And Callum also comes up with a load of BS, saying that he wasn't even at the property. He doesn't know anything. How can he? He doesn't live there. He was never there. But suddenly in Nicola's police interview, she completely turned on Callum, which I was not expecting because she's so obsessed with him. She started saying that he was an abusive man, which is highly likely. We obviously know that he was abusing Kaye. And Nicola started saying that it was all Callum. It was his fault. That he must have been abusing her daughter Kaye behind her back. And I'm like, no, it was in front of you and you also joined in. If anything, from what we know of this case, what has been reported, Nicola was actually the more abusive out of the two towards Kaye. So then the police go to Callum about these accusations, and now Callum turns on Nicola. And he said that she was an abusive and neglectful mom, which is the truth. And he said that it was all Nicola's fault. So the police didn't have a clue who was actually responsible. Were they both responsible or was he just one of them? So unbelievably, after their investigations, after the interviews, the police released Callum and Nicola out on bail. And this is when we get to one of the most shocking parts of today's case. Because after getting back home, what does Nicola do? Well, she does her favourite thing and takes to social media. She doesn't mourn her daughter's death. She's not falling apart. Oh, no. She gets straight back to social media and she starts posting on TikTok. Unbelievably, Nicola starts recording videos of herself dancing around and doing those little dance challenges and stuff and posting them on TikTok. And I'm like, what the actual hell? How is that the first thing that's in her mind to do when she gets home after her daughter has died from her own actions. She also posts like a makeup haul on TikTok as well, how she's so happy with her latest makeup purchases. And again, I'm just completely and utterly speechless. And when you know what has happened just days prior to her posting these videos on TikTok, it is just so chilling. How can she post herself on TikTok dancing? Her daughter has just lost her life, seemingly at the hands of herself and her boyfriend Callum. And whilst Nicola was posting videos of herself dancing on TikTok, the results of Kaylee's autopsy were released and the true extent of her injuries were revealed. Because it was found that Kaye had a whole host of very severe injuries. First of all, she had multiple fractures to her arms, multiple fractured ribs. She had chest injuries, stomach injuries. She even had a collapsed lung. She also had an injury to her right jaw, which indicated that she had been struck very hard in the face, either by a punch or a kick. She also had multiple fractures in her legs, again possibly indicating that her legs had been stamped on, or at least struck very hard with a heavy object. But what was the most telling in this autopsy is that these injuries alone had not been sustained on the day of her death, but had actually been building up over a longer period of time. In total, she had over 20 fractures to her ribs, with 5 of these fractures coming around 21 days before she died. So 3 weeks prior to her death, she already had 5 fractured ribs. There were also other fractures on her body that dated back a couple of weeks. Some of the broken ribs had actually started to heal, but then they had been broken again, showing that Kaye had been severely abused on multiple occasions. Her sternum was also fractured, indicating that someone had applied severe pressure to her chest, almost suffocating her. In the hours leading up to her death, it was shown that she had 19 different rib fractures, all at the same time. And the injuries were so severe that the coroner had said that the injuries that Kaye had sustained were the equivalent of being hit by a speeding car or falling from 3 floors onto concrete floor. Poor Kaye must have been in excruciating pain for a very long time, not just the day that she was murdered. These injuries are appalling, and it just shows you that Nicola or Callum, maybe both of them, had severely beaten Kaye on multiple occasions over a prolonged period of time. And when it came to the cause of her death, it was found that because of these beatings over a long period of time, Kaye's brain had started to swell. There was trauma to her head. There were small tears in Kaye's brain caused by forceful jolts to the head. And finally, all of these injuries resulted in a lack of oxygen and blood to the brain, which ultimately led to her tragic death. And just to make things even worse, we know that Kaye was being violently sick. Well, if Nicola or Callum or if anyone had sought medical assistance, there could have been a chance to save Kaye's life. If she was immediately seen to by medical professionals, Kaye could still be here today. But instead, Callum just ignored Kaye, didn't care, didn't want to help, left the flat with his friend, and Nicola just ignored her daughter all night. She just spent her time scrolling on her phone, being on social media, making those very concerning Google searches. Instead, she could have just dialed 999, got an ambulance out, and saved her daughter's life. But no, she didn't do that. She couldn't even do that. She just left her daughter to die alone in that bedroom that was just a dirty mattress on the floor. And just reading all of those injuries out loud, I cannot believe that 2 people could do that to a child, let alone once, but multiple times. They severely beat Kaye multiple times, broke her bones multiple times. And what I just find so heartbreaking is on the day of her death, we saw that CCTV footage of Kaye following her mom into that lift, going to the park and then returning home. In that footage, she already had fractured ribs. She already had severe injuries, but you would never know that. She was suffering in silence and no one helped her. And those 2 people, Nicola and Callum, are pure evil. And Unfortunately, the way this case ends is going to infuriate you even more. So following this, both Callum and Nicola were charged with murder, and in August of 2021, their trial finally happened. And throughout the whole trial, both of them just turned on one another. Both of them were blaming each other for the death of Kaye. Nicola's defense lawyer portrayed her as a caring mother. And I know that a defense lawyer has to do their job, but I'm like, caring mother? Caring mother where? The defense lawyer portrayed Nicola as the innocent one, that she had gotten into a relationship with an abusive man and it was all him. It was his fault. He had abused Kaye. However, Callum's defense lawyer said that he was innocent in all of this. He was not even living at the property. Kaye was not his child. He was not present at the time that these injuries had occurred. And Nicola was abusive, neglectful, and she was the one that was fully to blame. And pretty much the whole trial was just that, going back and forth. Callum's friend, who was there on the evening of Kaye's death, also appeared in the trial and took the stand, but he wasn't able to give much context. He said that he didn't know what was going on in Kaye's bedroom. He never saw anything. He didn't know who was responsible. He just saw both Callum and Nicola going in and both Callum and Nicola coming out. And in the end, it was very difficult for anyone in the courtroom to pin down who exactly was responsible for Kaye's death. And unbelievably, in the end, due to a lack of evidence on who exactly was to blame, by the end of the trial, it was found that Nicola and Callum were not guilty of murder. I'm sorry, what? They were actually found guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. And I'm like, hell no. Nicola was also found guilty of another charge of child cruelty, and we can assume that that was because she was the primary carer of Kaye. But manslaughter. Manslaughter. In what world is this manslaughter? So because they were only found guilty of manslaughter, Nicola ended up being sentenced to 15 years and Callum was sentenced to 14 years. And given that they were 23 and 22 at the time of sentencing, that means that if they do serve their whole sentence, Nicola will be released when she is 38 and Callum will be released when he is 36. But both of them could get out earlier than that if they behaved well in prison. And it just makes my blood boil that neither one of them were found guilty of murder. And we all heard what Kaye's injuries were, what she must have gone through on multiple occasions at the hands of at least one of these evil people. And the difference between murder and manslaughter is the intent. And I think to severely beat up a 3-year-old child to the extent that they did with Kaye, I am sorry, but that right there is intent to murder. She is a tiny, defenseless child who has already been neglected for a very long time. She is already malnourished. And to severely beat her up to the point where her injuries are equivalent of being hit by a speeding car, that is murder. That is intent to murder. And also, don't forget the conversations that they were having over text message. Both of them were expressing very violent thoughts towards Kaye. There was even mention of killing her at one point. So again, right there, you can even class that as intent to murder. And even still, even though they both were found guilty of manslaughter, their sentences should still be longer. Because in the end, Nicola especially was such a neglectful mother who was so fixated on herself. She was so obsessed with herself, so obsessed with social media and the validation that she would get from other people, that she just completely abused and neglected her daughter and just left her daughter to die alone in a filthy, disgusting room with just a mattress on the floor. And I don't know how either one of those people can live with themselves after what they did to that little girl. And I just want to end this video focusing on the victim of today's case. Kaye Jade Priest was described as a sweet, bubbly and charming young girl. She loved playing with dolls and teddy bears. She pretended to care for them, to feed them, the kind of care that she never received in her own life from her own mother. She was also incredibly kind and polite to those around her. She was always bubbly and smiley, made loads of friends at nursery. She always stayed positive despite everything going on around her. And she had so much more to achieve in life. She was taken far, far too soon. She was just 3 years old. And this case is heartbreaking beyond belief, and my heart goes out to Kaylee's extended family and just anyone that was in her life that Kaylee touched, because she was just the sweetest little girl and she should still be here today. And that brings us to the end of today's heartbreaking case. As always, let me know your thoughts, theories and opinions, and don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to Magellan TV for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.